Will be starting shortly. Kindly mute your microphones. Good evening to our distinguished guests, faculty, staff, students, ladies and gentlemen. A special welcome to our chief guest, Father Stephan Rothlin, Director of Macau Ricci Institute and CEO of Rothlin International Management Consulting Limited, Beijing and Macau. We shall now invoke God's blessing with a prayer song. Please rise for the prayer song.
Every shiny star that twinkles in the night sky, every drop of morning dew, every spark of fire blazing in the furnace, every captivating view, every rainbow in the sky, every pretty butterfly tells the fascinating news to those who dare to hold. And the message is God still loves the world. God still loves the world. So throw your life into His hands. Day by day discern His plans. God is passionately busy loving you and me. Every ocean wave that breaks upon the seashore, every stalk of golden reed, every silver stream that gushes down the mountains, every drop of honey sweet, every eagle flying high, every one that wriggles by tells the fascinating news to those who dare to hold. And the message is God still loves the world. God still loves the world. So throw your life into His hands. Day by day discern His plans. God is passionately busy loving you and me. God is passionately busy loving you and me. God is passionately busy loving you and me.
Now I invite Father Christie, Director of XLRI, to welcome the gathering and introduce the speaker of this evening.
Dear Father Stefan Rothlin, Chief Guest of the function today, Mr. T.V. Narendran, Chairman, Board of Directors, XLRI, CEO and Managing Director of Tata Steel, Managing Directors of various Tata Group of companies, members of the XLRI Governing Board, faculty, staff, students, alumni, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 28th annual JRD Tata Oration on Business Ethics. an event that has been of significance to us ever since it was initiated 30 years ago. In 1991, XLRI, in association with a select TATA Group companies, established the XLRI JRD TATA Foundation for Business Ethics to mark their long-standing commitment and contribution to business ethics in India. In addition, Tata Steel has also instituted the JRD Tata Ethics Chair Professor. XLRI is profoundly grateful to Tata Steel and other Tata Group of companies. We are proud to note that Mr. JRD Tata himself delivered the first business ethics oration on 4th March 1991, and he set the bar high for the successive ethics orations. We at XLRI have been truly privileged to have had distinguished speakers from different parts of the world to visit us here in Jamshedpur and share with us their thoughts and experiences in the field of business ethics and related areas. I am honored to introduce to you Father Stefan Rockling, the speaker for this evening. I am privileged to have known him for more than 15 years. He is a Jesuit priest from Switzerland, and he has been working in China, Hong Kong, and Macau for the last 22 years, promoting business ethics and corporate social responsibility. It must have been a formidable challenge to him. He has a Ph.D. in moral theology from State University of Innsbruck, Austria, and he is fluent in various languages, particularly in Mandarin Chinese, English, German, Spanish, Italian, and French. He is the founder and CEO of Rothlin International Management Consulting Limited, located in Beijing and Hong Kong. He provides consulting services to encourage the practice of corporate social responsibility in China and Hong Kong. From 2005 to 13, he was also the Secretary General for the Center for International Business Ethics, Beijing, and Chairman of the Association of International Business Ethics in Hong Kong. He has become a sought-after speaker on international business ethics throughout the business schools in Asia. We are indeed highly privileged and honored to have him with us. On behalf of XLRI family, I extend a warm welcome to Father Stefan Rothlin. I once again welcome each one of you to the 28th annual JRD Oration on Business Ethics. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. God bless.
Now I invite Father Stephan Rothlin, our chief guest, to deliver the oration.
This is the JRD TATA Oration on Business Ethics lecture on the topic of China, the emerging superpower, the ethical underpinnings, by Stephan Rothlin. Dear Professor Christie, dear students, dear colleagues, it is really a great honor and pleasure to share with you a few insights on this JRD TATA Oration lecture. I was looking forward to emerge in Jamshedpur last year because the last time I visited CLRI was 26 years ago with a group of students from Germany and Switzerland, accompanied by Father George de Souza. This is not possible, but still I very much cherish this chance to be in a certain sense with you. I was promoting online education since more than 6 years. So I feel happy to be able to have this chance to share some insights on business ethics. The last Pedro Arrupe Oration lecture I delivered 21 years ago in Chennai at the Satna Nilayam Institute, and I was arguing for a new alliance between India and China. This is still not a popular move. However, I would like to challenge you to look at my insights from this point of view, not as usually people fear the fear about China facing this supposedly aggressive superpower, but from the attitude like Matteo Ricci, Roberto De Nobili, so many Indian missionaries as friends of China. So the opening would be to share some basic data on China first, and from there to explain which are the key elements of business ethics. That's what I'm doing in the last 23 years, mostly in Beijing, teaching in business schools, as well as in Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, and Taipei. We first have to see this dramatic economic transformation. So here I refer to data from OECD, just these amazing figures for this dramatic growth of China. Growth, of course, has slowed in the first half of 22, but still remains strong. China has managed to control the pandemic COVID-19 and will remain a major driver of global growth. The financial risks from high corporate debt are rising and need to be addressed urgently. The challenge is the unifying product and labor markets across the country, which will boost productivity and inclusiveness. So here you see just the picture which clearly demonstrates that the real GDP growth remains just very significant. Here are some figures how the growth of China will slow gradually. If you look at the real GDP growth, GDP deflator, and also terms of trade and fiscal balance. We witness enormous trade frictions, which hurt not only one side, but actually the global economy. Just look at these figures of OECD. So when we have 25% of tariffs on goods worth of $50 billion US. Or another key factor is the impact of these trade frictions, shaving off 1/4% of Chinese and US GDP and reduce world trade by 0.4% by 2020. Other countries negatively affected through declining trade growth
so in the longer term benefit from an improved competitive position in the US market. What is also typical for China is that the saving rate remains very high, even as you see that it has decreased over the past decade. China is now an important investor as Japan. A little commercial for my journal, Macau Ricci Institute Journal, has focused the issue number 4 on the impact of this Belt and Road Initiative called BRI. India is not member of. One example of financial challenges China is facing is the local government debt, which is still very high in terms of its ratio to revenues. Another key fact is also that we have to bear in mind that the state ownership, especially under the present leadership, is still very high. Also, you see from the chart how he has declined. The battle cry to get rich is glorious, so to the open door policy, also is reflected by the growing gap between the rich and the poor. So you see very clearly, if you look at the figures of the top 1% net personal wealth share against the bottom 50% share, how dramatically this gap is growing. However, I often ask the economists if the situation on the countryside did improve. And all the Chinese economists agree that not only the cities, but also the countryside has significantly also improved from the opening up policy. Here, the Uecd recommendations for a new paradigm of economics. I have also organized the last conference in Macau on this new paradigm of economics. I hope you are the main drivers to really bring that about, that this would not be just empty rhetoric. So to distribute high quality education and health resources more evenly would reduce incentives to move to mega cities. There are now restrictions in China to move to the first-tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai. So this would require to gradually ease restriction on access to public services for non-hukou holders and delink it from the hukou. Then to centralize the financing of some key spending items, such as wage bills in education and health. This is also something typical to China, how much the Chinese spend for education. It's something like over 30% of their GDP. Abolish the floor and raise the ceiling for social security contributions. Widen the base of personal income tax and make it more progressive. Introduce a recurrent tax on the holding of real estate and inheritance tax. And target social assistance programs better to the needy. That's also one of my major research projects on philanthropy, actually inspired by the India's Companies Act. How can these very successful, sometimes young entrepreneurs be useful to the disadvantaged in the society? Then a prime reference is, of course, the environmental responsibility, as the pollution of the air, of the soil and water is just devastating. And we could have said, with a more enlightened view on sustainable growth, which would take into account environmental responsibility, many negative side effects would have been avoided. Further recommendations include to enforce regulations more strictly, raise fines for polluters, and raise environmental tax, but in particular on fossil fuels. What is also actually going on is halting the construction of coal-fired power plants, increase investment in pollution treatment facilities and environmental infrastructure, in particular urban water treatment and environmentally harmless rural sanitary facilities. So now, again, China as emerging superpower intends to be a major player in taking responsibility for the environment. So here my bottom line, China really has made impressive gains, claiming to have lifted 700 million people out of poverty in 40 years since this open door policy. So China should be given credit for alleviation of mass poverty, as well as for handling the recent COVID-19 crisis very well after initial failures. So if China manages to opt for a more sustainable economic growth, it would have a significant impact on the whole world economy. Here also my humble insights about doing business ethics in China since 23 years is really to take seriously the importance of the local Confucian culture and its values, including also a deep crisis of these values, the need to inspire moral leadership and managerial responsibility, very clearly also use case studies as the most effective pedagogy for business ethics. So within a few weeks, I will publish 46 of these case studies with World Scientific Press in Singapore. And then what I think we should also feel very excited about is providing access to education through innovative programs using online courses. And here again, combining both wisdom traditions of India and China to cultivate moral virtue through rediscovery of spiritual practices common to the wisdom traditions of China. In India, I like to refer to the very rich South Indian treaty Tirukkural, only of course to realize that not even people from South India would truly treasure this treasure of wisdom. As a CEO of the wholly foreign-owned enterprise based in Beijing and in Hong Kong, I consider social business as a bridge between business and academia. Here again, I think India, you have made much progress in this area since many years. Original research on Chinese moral philosophy and its contribution to interreligious dialogue on business ethics must be very concrete, not just daydreaming. We also have to further push for original research on case studies emerging from Chinese and Asian experiences in business, as the common complaint is that still case studies from business schools are too much relying on American, European case studies. We have to further develop online resource distribution, and in the following overview, I follow this Rothlin textbook, International Business Ethics, where I owe a great deal of gratitude for my teams in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Macau, and my colleague, Professor Dr. Dennis McCann, who also taught widely all over Asia with Professor McKenna have been working since more than 14 years. So my first insight is to share ethics, not as like a straight jacket, you have to do this or that, you should do this or that, but as a game, business not like a war, but a sport. At this insight, all over Asia, Chinese do like to play a lot. So you want to let people feel at ease and also avoiding coming from Switzerland just to criticize people in Asia. So you see at the bottom always case studies. So I always felt appropriate touching on the thorny issue of corruption, not to have Asian example first, but maybe start with Swiss involvement. So talking about the FIFA, the Federal International Federation of Football, and how these multiple stories on corruption within this enjoyable sport also show how corruption erodes trust and promotes skepticism, which is both bad for business. So we have to look at the relationship between the philosophical concept of a game and strategy. So this is my approach to business ethics related to management, so that also bloody-hearted economists could see the true value. So here is how I map the field. China, and we may of course also add India as drivers of economic growth for sure, and perhaps also on ethics and values. So here a key term is the so-called 君子 in Chinese. We could translate the morally refined person. So moral leadership requires a commitment to the integrity of the game, of business itself. And it is the experience, not only in Asia, but this 君子, so the inspiring leader, this is actually driving an improvement of values. So I share this experience of working with such a leader, Andrew Saw, who has established credit unions all over Asia and Africa, and has been working together with Father John Collins, Father Alfred Daignan, and other Jesuits over many years. He was also ombudsman in Hong Kong. So walking the talk, this is truly the most inspiring example. And as people experience here, more inspiring than just poor compliance with the law. So Confucius taught that society would grow naturally if people could learn to practice the basic virtues of China's wisdom tradition. I hope you consider this also as an invitation and an inspiration for you. There is little knowledge still, no matter in India or in other countries, about this treasure of China's wisdom tradition. The COVID-19 crisis certainly also pushed us to take sciences more seriously. So in terms of compelling case studies, I observe these scandals of infant milk powder containing harmful amounts of toxic chemical melamine over many years. At least since 2004, we have these tremendous scandals of criminal gangs mixing this toxic chemical melamine so that the milk could be preserved longer. This has the devastating effect, even until now, that Chinese are very skeptical in consuming their own products. So, just an example, a friend of mine was so happy to have his grandson, and so I asked him, what shall I give you? He said, well, give me foreign milk powder. Meaning, just one example, how deeply skeptical Chinese become to their own products, which I found devastating. So if everyone cheats, then there is no advantage to be gained by cheating. Again, lying destroys trust in personal relationships, so fraud destroys trust in business. Another dimension you can explore with different dilemmas in case studies is the moral decision-making in business. The complexity of managerial responsibility requires an approach to moral decision-making which respects that complexity. International business ethics attempts to take one further into the heart of such responsibility. A number of case studies, another one I wrote with Professor Barbara Krug on the clash between the French company Danone and Wahaha, a very successful water bottling company in China. Here I share this clash with Pepsi Cola in China. You could maybe simplify those storylines that you have in a joint venture, a very brief honeymoon followed by a very painful long divorce. So you have seen this wonderful alliance first between Pepsi Cola and the local partner, Hu Fengxian. An initial success, but also then the quick erosion of trust and years of litigation between Pepsi and Hu Fengxian. The takeaway from such analysis of case studies, which also shows, of course, how the local can easily then get his allies as a mop against the foreign investor, shows against that Chunse leadership presupposes the keeping of promises. It's also totally unfair to put the blame on the failure of any of these parties. Each one has a responsibility, and usually it is because the partners fail truly to understand each other, then all ends up in tears. From the business ethics perspective, of course, the principle of justice is crucial to any international business ethics consideration. And another key topic, of course, is Guanxi, which stands for this web of relationship. I think you hear in all the business schools, but it's not sufficient to invite Chinese partners to a meals. There are much more baby steps to be taken so that you can truly earn the trust of your partner, no matter Chinese or foreign business partners. So here is this all key issue of a free and fair competition I encountered a lot in my training seminars, including also with state-owned enterprises in China. We have to truly always take into consideration the true cost of cutthroat competition. We have to conceive a market as win-win transaction and a fair exchange of goods and services. So you may not be familiar with an ongoing fight about two major dairy companies in China, Mengniu and Yili, based in Inner Mongolia. And I take this example because they actually were aware about their ethical problems and promoted ethical trainings, requiring then the participants to take an oath on business ethics. However, it came out that Mengniu fabricated rumors about Yili to discredit the Yili brand. And actually Mengniu had to admit that they did actually hire PR firms, which would spread the rumor that you would get sexual malfunctions if you would consume products of Yili. So this has been, of course, devastating to the image of Mengniu and shows the gap between paying lip service to business ethics. But still, we have just to take in mind how difficult it is to be serious about business ethics. A few areas of stakeholder responsibility. So if we try to consider which areas are affected by business actions. Here, as the golden rule in different wisdom traditions, do not do to others what you do not want them to do to you, from the Analects of Confucius, which resonates in so many other religions and wisdom traditions. We see in China how dramatically also consumer rights have developed. First, in Hong Kong and Macau, I felt privileged to work together with the Macau Consumer Council, who has significantly enhanced consumer rights over the last couple of years. So you may also remember this deterioration of trust due to a supply chain scandal which happened ever since 2007, related to the 3 global recalls of Mattel with the global leader in toys. And I do give credit to Mattel, who ever since has established an independent commission to test if truly the working conditions in the suppliers, mostly in southern China, did improve. And one of my most critical, also Indian colleagues, Prakash Sethi, was in charge of this independent commission and truly witnessed some significant progress. Sometimes we are just stuck with scandals and do overlook when a firm also then actually took action to improve the working conditions. Another major area touches marketing ethics. And here the key issue is fiduciary responsibility in a culture of predatory lending. Again, we have witnessed so many times that fraud can destroy financial markets. From the business ethics side, we hoped that in the wake of the financial crisis, which hit the global economy, more awareness about how to avoid such a disaster might emerge, but we have to say this was not sufficient. So we could say the idolization of profit maximization is still very much ingrained, also in the paradigm of some business schools. And it is the challenge, how can we maintain entrepreneurial culture while avoiding this culture of moral indifference? In this slide, you see this hands of miners. You just recently get the news of these miners who was trapped in the mines in China. Some died, some have been rescued through spectacular actions. We have to look at it, and I was surprised when I first published my book that all these scandals about accidents in mines did not get censored. Sometimes my impression is, well, people do not really care about these people being abused. But this is certainly also a major issue. Are we really committed in improving a lot of these workers who risk their life daily? So the key issue is here human dignity as the baseline for determining the obligation of companies toward their workers. I also want to hint to the fact that this was an ongoing debate within the Chinese Communist Party to come up with this conclusion, what maybe the Western world would put under human rights. From a Confucian perspective, it would be human dignity. So there's no point to insist on some jargons, what the push is, and also the meaning that you have a business school in a poor area. What can we do to truly take into account the human dignity of those people most in need? How we, in line with Confucianism and many other wisdom traditions, can we affirm the right of each person? So the key terms in Chinese are renge, possibility of moral excellence, and sunyan, the need to develop such possibilities. And it's also evident how social exposure programs can significantly actually enhance this kind of awareness. Here comes actually the most popular chapter in the book. And surprisingly, the story on sexual harassment, we also have to give credit to the Chinese government that now sexual harassment has become a crime, and you can gain a lot of money with training seminars just on observing a proper behavior towards your employees, as it is not possible anymore for a CEO to abuse his secretary. Secretary may sue, as in the case of Dominic Strauss-Kahn, who was about to be handled as a candidate for president of France, was sued by Nafissatou Diallo, and you have just a recent movie has come out, Movie Room 2806, the accusation about the downfall of this powerful figure. And this was before the whole move of Me Too. Another thorny issue everywhere is whistleblowing. So in case you feel that the dignity of a person has been violated, what can you do to react? nowhere in the world you can challenge your CEO. That's impossible. But my recommendation usually is that a whistleblower should be allowed to contact one designated member of a board to voice his or her grievances. And this designated member of the board would then be qualified to investigate if an abuse is fabricated as a revenge or if there is substance of grievances by a whistleblower. So this was a massive case at Tokyo Electric Power Company, which was accused to withholding information in the radical leak at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Another wide area where actually I usually start is, of course, with this financial reform and with fiduciary duties at ethics in finance. Together with specialists, I have worked on an investor bill of rights together with a dear friend, Tom Myers, and arguing for a reform of finances, which would require a working together of institutions and regulators. I think you are all familiar with this new generation of banks, La Banca Etica in Italy or Grameen Bank, Bangladesh. I mentioned the credit unions as pioneering a new standard of excellence in the banking industry. And so we all put together the most recent document is this Macau manifesto, which would also argue for subsidiarity economics, well-being for everyone, and financial transactions which are never private but always involve environmental, social, and governance issues. In corporate responsibility, I wanted to refer to many inspiring examples from India, so you know much better than I do this significant progress in India through many years, but also provoked to the Companies Act. So you have, for instance, just taking Infosys values of sustainability, transparency, and integrity, and how much a company, of course, with its ups and downs, can be committed to truly not just have a rhetoric on CSR, but making a significant contribution to the society. A good example to distinguish between the law and ethics are intellectual property rights. There's been a huge progress all over Asia in the protection of property rights. However, the example I gave of the government of Thailand, which allowed the Ministry of Health to violate the intellectual property rights of foreign drug manufacturers to provide the needed AIDS medicines, show that there are some border cases where medicine is urgently needed, and it would be just devastating just to unilaterally only insist on legal issues. Of course, it's also a huge case study now with this massive vaccination going on of COVID-19, and where again we see the very troubling gap between the rich and the poor. The latest figure is that the vaccination may be finished in poorer countries by 2024. Here there's a host of case studies on corruption. You may recall also how devastating this example of year of corruption of Siemens was, first of all, for Germans. They had such a high kind of regard for Siemens. But with all these case studies at the end, I let the students decide what you think in your country, is corruption truly avoidable or not? And I respect, for instance, case of a very brilliant student from the Philippines. She was arguing, sorry, I do think it's just unavoidable. I think we should cherish if a student, just based on the insight on rampant corruption, would still conclude instead of just selling cheap shots on optimism about avoiding corruption. So this would be also a main challenge to you. Would you feel truly committed, especially within a most competitive and bloody, cutthroat environment, to truly opt to diminish corruption? We say very modestly diminishing, because this may already be an enormous achievement. I also want to share a case study which may not be well known outside Japan, about a very successful firm, Schindler, a Swiss firm, which is still out of business in Japan. Because what happened is that in 2007, a young man entered into an escalator, and then he was so much hurt in the process that he died. And in the follow-up, Schindler was very slow on their hands to apologize. And so the public, the media in Japan were so outraged about this unethical behavior of Schindler, this lack of sensitivity, that even until now, Schindler is out of business in Japan. So to show business ethics should not be considered as something very, very marginal, but actually also goes to the core of success if you truly have a sensitivity for local cultures. Another spectacular progress of ethics was through the phone hacking scandal. You may remember, as the British Guardian discovered moral abuses of information gathering in the Murdoch Media Group, News of the World, when some journalists were illegally hacking into the phone of the parents of a child who was taken away. The moral outrage about this unethical behavior provoked that one of the most successful media, News of the World, went into bankruptcy. Again, another shade of what it means human dignity. At the TATA oration lecture is certainly appropriate, and I did that before I got this invitation, to truly honor this genuine drive of Indian philanthropists in midst of so many challenges are promoting a credible implementation of CSR, corporate social responsibility. And this is actually this ongoing question and challenge for me, for the counterparts in China. And a key moment was the response after the Sichuan earthquake in May 2008, when more than 70,000 people died tragically, that provoked an unseen outpouring of corporate philanthropy all over China. We have to follow up on this. Another example is the immigration issues and a way also to implement Christian social teaching. This was done with Chinese migrants by a Catholic priest in Prato, where you had also many abuse of the workforce in the textile firm, where a Chinese Catholic priest made courageous move to insist to make these labor conditions of the Chinese workers in Italy more humane. The silent stakeholder is the environment, and maybe the first also compelling case studies when you start teaching about business ethics in China. You can look out of the window and say, why do we have this smog? It's not lack of laws. There is really the lack of commitment to truly struggle against corruption, which makes that water, soil, and air is still unbearable. And we also have to credit a significant shift where China was very keen to say, well, we have to just focus on economic development. No point to have these security measures, no point to take too much care about the environment. We see really a true shift since, I would say, 2 to 3 years to make a firm commitment on all levels of society to be serious about their environmental responsibility in China, not just nationally, but also as a global player. And so I want to finish again with this example how a new paradigm can start with credit unions and cooperatives all over Asia and also Africa. So these are the examples how to strive to build economic solidarity amongst the poorest citizens of local communities. I mentioned my friend George de Souza, who was over many years also involved in mass poverty alleviation in Bangladesh with these cooperatives, also, of course, in India. And one of the key purposes also, which makes it sometimes difficult to implement it in a Chinese context, is this self-empowerment of the members and the self-reliance.
I know this has been kind of a very broad insight into business ethics. I look very much forward to your questions, and thank you for giving me this great opportunity to share only a few insights on business ethics with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Stephan, for your thought-provoking and inspiring oration. May I request Professor Paramjot Singh, Chairperson for Center for Peace and Justice, to moderate the question and answer session. Professor Paramjot.
Thank you, Father Rockling, for delivering such an enrichingly interesting oration. I am sure
The audience is eager to engage further, Father Rockling, and seek answers to their queries on such an interesting topic that comes out of China. I request you all to just go to open the chat box and type your questions there. We will try to accommodate few of them. Dear Father Rockling, we have our first question. This comes from a student of general management, and he asks you, what challenges did you face as a priest and as a scholar working in China? Father Rothlin, please.
Yes, first of all, really, thank you so much for this opportunity. The challenges, first of all, in China is really the language first. It's really extremely difficult language. So also what is written between the lines is very, very also, you need a lot of time then to understand that. But I could say that I felt always actually warmly welcome, as they maybe perceived a bit modest as a Swiss. So, and then it's really amazingly complex to truly understand China. So you need a lot of time. And then also find a balance. You need to be on one side, of course, firm with your principles, on the other side, flexible, so that you can truly, for instance, with consulting, to respond to the different requests to the different groups. So that was the main, one of the main challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. There's another question, and this comes from a participant here, and the question is, how can we make a balance between environmental ethics and development as far as developing countries are concerned, considering that scarce resources exist on this planet? Father.
We were cut, so is the balance between environmental ethics you were asking, and what was the other? We were just cut. So what, can you maybe repeat the question? So in scarce resources.
So the question is linked to the environmental, social, and governance norms. And the question is that how can we balance between environmental ethics and development when we all know that we have scarce resources on this planet? How do we confront this problem? Father Roth.
Yes, now I can. Sometimes we are cut. Now I hear you again. Can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you, Father. I'm repeating the question one more time for you.
Good.
And the question is, when we have scarce resources, Father, how can we make a balance between environmental ethics and development in the light of scarce resources that we have on this planet? Yes, Father.
Yes, so here I wanted to hint the development also in China. So very strong, so that first, say 20 years ago, very much the focus on economic development. That was really the key focus. But now I think in China is really, I would say since 2-3 years, awareness how much, especially considering the scarce resources, we have that make a priority to consider much more how can we make better use of these scarce resources. So I really feel, I remember 20 years ago, I published a book on this, and contrary to other books, it was not successful. But now, this awareness now is here, how much for a sustainable business you have to consider this and how much ethics needs to be integrated into economic reasoning. So that was also, sometimes ethics is dismissed, soft skill. We need much more to, in order to answer, make the argument to combine economics with ethics. So to say we need that to get the best use for scarce resources.
Thank you very much, Father.
A key water shortage, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Father. I have another question for you, which comes from an expert on land acquisition in India. And he asks you, how does China manage land acquisition in the light of massive industrial development? Is land acquisition a problem in China? And what are the solutions the Chinese government has in acquiring land and yet managing the rights of the people? Yes, Father Rockling.
Excellent question. I also here, honestly, I see an improvement in the property rights. No, before it was all the property of communist government. And now also you have, when it comes, for instance, a new street or a new main road, the government started much more also negotiating with the different stakeholders. So, and still, of course, there are undeniable problems. So a huge, for instance, case study is property rights during relocation, during major events like the Olympics. So there was certainly a period where these property rights were not sufficiently respected. And if I may also say why I'm so touched by your invitation, I'm a friend of A.T. Thomas, who was a friend, an Indian Jesuit friend I got to know in Manila, who was particularly also committed to this issue. So I think I have some background about your expertise. So, or also a simple example, as a foreigner, you may acquire one apartment. You cannot acquire a series of apartments. But so, and the process to purchase such property is now much more regulated than it was before. So just to say, this is not my major field, but I observe in my case studies the truly an improvement, a significant improvement in terms of defining the rights of the people, and also not just in terms of the law, but also the Communist Party realizing instead of imposing something or grabbing, land grabbing, it's much better than to negotiate to people. And for instance, the cause of riots is often also linked to this kind of land grabbing, also in China as well as in India.
Thank you very much, Father. Linked to your question, almost on the same line, is another question which comes up, and this is, do you think that despite emerging as a superpower, China's track record on protection of workers' rights is tarnished due to Foxconn-like instances known for gross violations? So how do you see a solution to these situations existing in China and elsewhere?
Yes, thank you very much. A very important question. So I do think now there has been also a shift concerning corporate social responsibility CSR reports. Personally, also I thought some years ago, this is just greenwashing and baloney. But there has been these different abuses you refer to. And so I do think that there is much more pressure on the companies to become serious on these issues and to improve working conditions. So I referred in my talk to Prakash Sethi's very critical Indian colleague, and who felt really that in the case of Mattel, they did make improvement in their working conditions. So now I do think with this also consumer movement is important. And then what we call in China the new media. So meaning despite of a tight control by the state media, the media of course are eager to get the true stories. And so this Foxconn scandal was widely published. So this has an additional, I think, significant pressure on the firms, which before used to ignore, or similar as you are certainly familiar in India, just abuse the workers or do not respect the trade unions.
Thank you, Father. We have many questions coming up, but I think they are all in the line of basically rights, civil society. So we will just take 2 more questions for Father Rocklin, because he has been speaking for a very long time, and I don't want to drain him on these questions for too long. So we have one very interesting question which comes before you, Father. And this is also a question which is a little sensitive. And the question is, how strong is civil society in China as far as human rights are concerned? Father Rocklin, please.
Yes, thank you. I think it's fascinating if you live in China, like I do, so you can see the progress of civil society, which is not so much publicized. So like a key event, just to underline again, was this terrible earthquake and the response to it by a wide range of people in China. So I would really argue there is some significant progress. And I think you always want in China, if you want to improve, to kind of find some common ground. China, I think, like in India, I encountered the same reaction. If you come and you know everything, you criticize, you will not improve anything. So you have always to bear that in mind. That does not mean to be self-complacent, but so in the case of that is from the terminology, you take the term human right instead of human rights, you take dignity, and then ask very concretely what we just discussed, labor conditions can we improve that? See? And once then you have made this case, and also in a respectful way, I then, of course, also want to argue, let's really be serious about these rights of the workers, of the woman, and actually, in my perception, the area of corporate social responsibility was actually the level to truly communicate in a productive, in a conducive manner with the Chinese. Because sometimes on the political level, you just clash, or it is ideological baloney. But we always, in this discussion, I think, have to first bear in mind what can we truly do to improve the situation. And first, the first acknowledgement is actually, and I think we have to credit it, the meaning. It is a huge achievement to have lifted hundreds of millions out of the poverty. I think you cannot dismiss that just as a jargon. I think this is an achievement, and from there, I think you can then more start. What can we do to further enhance them and make sure that these human rights are then truly respected?
Thank you, Father. And this is the last one. I think we'll end with this because there are a host of other questions, but we'll take this one. This is the last one. Father, the question is linked to the idea that you discussed, and that was with regards to the local traditions. And you talked about Confucianism and how the local traditions can be helpful in affecting changes in business ethics. So the question is, Father, how does local wisdom traditions influence value orientation and practices of business ethics in China? And is this a replicable model for the rest of Southeast Asia?
I know my Indian students also in Hong Kong ask the best questions, so thanks again, excellent question. So I think we can really acknowledge, we talk in China about Confucian entrepreneurship, and Chinese Ru Fang. No? So, and it's really not just a marginal phenomenon. So you have thousands of prominent business people to engage in these conferences on Confucian entrepreneurship. So, and personally, yes, I do also always refer, of course, to the Chinese government pushing the envelope of these Confucian values. You have the 12 socialist values. So why not take this as a start point? No? And I also have with colleagues who also familiar with really brilliant Indian students, but kind of teaching mostly in China. I really do think that business schools have a very important role to change society. See, and this model that you have values, I was referring to Tirukural, we could make a test among these 350 students who is really familiar with these key insights, I think very deep insights of the Indian Treaty on Ethics. So we could learn that this could be powerful, not as rhetoric, as empty baloney, but make that as your trading mark, not just that you are fantastic entrepreneurs, but also that this can be really something distinctive. See, because as this is no secret, this is also a bad reputation sometimes some Asian firms have brought, and that's for me this open question: do we actually still have this simplistic, disingenuous economic paradigm we promote, or is there another way? And I think concluding also can say, as Jesuits, we have a special devotion to CLRI, so to speak. So we think that in this innovating economics, you play a crucial role. So I hope that also this very significant values from your Indian traditions could, in a more significant way, influence business behavior.
Thank you, Father Rockling. Thank you very much. My heartfelt thanks to Father Rockling for delivering such an enriching oration. Your examples on the changing dynamics of business ethics from China was stunning, Father. You have provided several ideas for us to ponder and examples to replicate, especially, as you said, how local traditions can become a strength to build new templates of ethics in business transactions. Thank you, Father, for sharing your long experience in China and knowledge with us. We all hope to see you again. I also thank the TATA group of companies for setting up XLRI, JRD TATA Foundation in business ethics, and for making it possible to hold the 28th annual JRD TATA Oration on business ethics. This has been a wonderful evening with Father Rockling and his ideas. I thank our learned audience and our esteemed guests for their participation. Thanks for being here with us for the oration. I request you all to please put your hands together for a big round of applause for Father Stephan Rockling.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all. I wish you all a very good night. Thank you very much.